Welcome to the Blooming League of Original Podcasts.
Hello and welcome to Talk Musicals to Me, a new theatre podcast about musicals and their impact on people. My name is Caroline Sheen and I'm here to quiz some of the leading creatives in the entertainment industry about their relationship with musical theatre and how certain musicals may have influenced their lives in ways you may not even expect. From how they first encountered a musical to musicals they may never even have seen, let's dive in and introduce today's guest to open up and talk musicals to me. Our guest today is the wonderful George Stiles, a fantastic composer and now also a big-time producer of some of the most wonderful musicals that I have ever had the privilege to watch and occasionally be part of. George, you will know and have heard of as being the composer of writing team Stiles and Drew. George writes the music and Anthony Drew writes the lyrics and the book occasionally as well. They've written together Just So, Honk, Betty Blue Eyes. They've written the music and extra music for Poppins and Half a Sixpence. They've written Wind in the Willows, Identical, Becoming Nancy, so many others as well that I could list. They are two of the loveliest people I have ever worked with. And I'm really pleased to say we're going to have Anthony Drew on the podcast as well. But George got in there first. George, I'm so excited to talk to you today.
Hi, Caroline.
You have packing to do to go to Rome, so we should crack on.
No, I'm all right. I've knocked out the hour and a half, Caroline, so let's crack it.
You're a gem. What I didn't mention was your amazing new producing career, which includes Why Am I So Single? And that little show that has taken the world by absolute storm, Six.
Oh, yes, it has, hasn't it?
It really has.
Quite the remarkable thing.
You went to see Six on a whim, am I thinking, George, or somebody asked you, they said they'd seen it and thought you'd enjoy it?
I went to see it because I was already friends with one of the two writers, Toby Marlowe. His dad and I were in a band together at school, and Toby, as a result, I'd known since he was a baby. And when he was about 16, his dad called me up and said, "My Toby thinks he might want to write musicals. If he comes to see you for a bit of work experience, will you talk him out of it?" I said, "I can't promise that, but I can definitely give him some work experience." So we became friends when he came and spent a week with me when I was working on Wind in the Willows and a few other things. And we talked Sondheim and we talked all sorts of things. So when he finally did write a musical, he texted me from Edinburgh where they were doing the show in a student production at the Fringe. And he said, "I've written this thing about the Six Wives of Henry VIII reborn as a girl band. I'd love you to come and see it. People are saying really nice things to me. What should I do?" And I said, "Take everybody's number, smile sweetly, but promise nothing." So I went to see it when it came back to Cambridge a few weeks later because I couldn't get up to Edinburgh that summer. And I saw it in Cambridge when it was doing a sort of valedictory lap of honour at the ADC Theatre at midnight in October 2017. And I literally couldn't believe what I was seeing because the theatre was packed with under 26-year-olds, and you just never see a theatre audience of that age demographic. And they literally behaved as if they were at a Beyonce concert, cheering, screaming, whooping, talking back to the Queens. And I just thought this was the most exciting experience I'd ever witnessed because it was theatre for that age group in the most brilliant way. And it made me laugh, and it didn't make me feel old, and it didn't make me feel stupid. And most things for young people do both of those things. So it was an absolute joy. And I just thought, I've got to be part of making sure the whole world can see this. So I rang my friend Kenny Wax and off we went.
And then it all kicked off for it big time. Oh, George, that's incredible. I love that story. I can't believe I didn't know all the ins and outs of that. That's just superb. And the thing you say about it appealing to the young demographic, like so brilliantly. And yet my septuagenarian parents have both been to see it twice. They love it.
Great. Well, they've only got a few more times to go and they'll be up to 6.
My mum listens to it in the car all the time.
Love that.
There's an appreciation for it across the spectrum of generations, I think.
Well, they're real bops, aren't they, the tunes? So that was the other thing. I knew that the way to get the world to see it would be to release an album, because I just thought it was such a great score. So that was the first thing we did, is we recorded an album.
And that went viral.
That went mental. It's, I think, perhaps the first show in history to have been entirely sold via social media. We spent almost nothing on conventional print advertising. It was all done through a brilliantly managed social media account.
That's incredible. But you're not giving up the composing, are you? That's also continuing.
I'm certainly not. No, music is deep, deep, deep inside me. I have to make music on a daily basis.
Well, I'm sure you and I have both done podcasts where we talk about our careers and probably get asked the same questions all the time about the same shows.
And bore everybody to death until they switch off. Yes.
Everyone's like, I've heard these answers before. So I thought it would be interesting to ask people at the minute, especially musical theatre creatives, about their musical theatre encounters and inspirations. So I have 10 questions for us to talk about other musicals, not just the ones that you've written. So shall we get started?
Hit me, baby, one more time.
George, how did you and musical theatre first meet?
I suppose the truth is not on stage, on film. When I was 6, I remember going to see Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, which was the big hit musical of that summer, probably 2 years or 1 year after Mary Poppins had been released, with the same composers, Richard and Robert Sherman. And I just remember thinking they were such brilliant songs. I went straight home, and I'd just begun to learn the piano at 6, and I picked out the tune of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, we love you. I know this is familiar to you, Caroline.
I've heard of that one.
I picked that out on the piano, and I just thought, this is amazing. I can make the piano sound like anything I want to make it sound like.
That's wonderful. So going to see a musical informed your piano learning then, I imagine.
It made me realize that I could play music by ear. I could hear something and then I could find it on the piano. And that was the beginning, really, of my life as an improvising composer, I suppose. Because once you've picked out a tune, pick out a simple tune, you can then expand from that, can't you?
Absolutely.
I just realized that the songs could be songs that you would remember all your life. They were so hooky, and you remembered not just the music, but the words too. The two things were like that.
Yeah.
Absolutely intertwined. You couldn't separate one from the other. It's like you can't say the phrase, "Oh, what a beautiful morning," without hearing the tune, can you?
Absolutely not. I mean, I think I probably thought it with the tune in my head this morning, because it is a beautiful sunny day today.
Stunning, isn't it?
And did it make you want to discover more about musicals by going to watch Chitty, or to go and maybe try and find a way of seeing Mary Poppins?
I'd been a little bit too young to go to Mary Poppins when it came out a couple of years previous. So I saw bits of it on the telly, because, you know, there was always that show called Disney Time, which the television channels all showed. And Disney Time had like the best bits from all the Disney films. And I certainly remember The Jungle Book and The Aristocats and those musicals coming along, and just loving all of those songs. So yes, I mean, I think I began to make associations that I liked that kind of song. I liked happy, catchy tunes that told a story.
And the Sherman brothers were masters of that, weren't they?
Unrivaled, no question. I mean, catchy beyond all belief. I mean, they're what the Germans call earworms, Ohrwurm. They go in one ear and they never come out the other.
I think people sometimes don't realise the breadth of their input into sort of not just the musical theatre canon, but the music canon, really. They have written so many tunes that for a long time I thought they were just Mary Poppins and Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, but there's so much else they've written. Even if you go to Disney World or Disneyland, everybody wants to go on It's a Small World.
Yep.
And that's their tune as well. The Jungle Book, and the one that I loved growing up, The Slipper and the Rose.
That's a beautiful score, isn't it? Yeah.
Oh, just stunning.
That's one to go and lose yourself down a wormhole on YouTube. Watch The Slipper and the Rose. It's a stunning film.
Oh, it really is. Richard Chamberlain and Gemma Craven. And I remember when I was at college, Diane Pilkington managed to find the sheet music to tell him, and all of us were so envious. We were like, oh my God, she's got that gorgeous song from Slipper and the Rose.
The Shermans were the very best of people. There would be, without the Sherman brothers, there would be no Alan Menken, there'd be no Stephen Schwartz. I mean, there's no question. They were just the absolute benchmark for all that happened in musical films following.
They really were. And I remember meeting Robert. He came to my opening night of Chitty. I don't think he was around much longer, but Richard came. And then obviously through my association with Mary Poppins and just meeting Richard like 3 or 4 occasions, he was always the kindest, most lovely, supportive, encouraging man.
Amen to that. Wasn't he just when we first played him and his wife Elizabeth, our new songs for Mary Poppins, the stage show? I remember him sitting there. We were so anxious, me and Anthony, because we thought if they hate it, this is going to be the worst moment of my entire life because they're such gods to us. And we played Practically Perfect and did it in the context of the scene that we'd written around it, which we'd written as Mary Poppins' first song when she arrives, because we thought Spoonful of Sugar is such a brilliant song and the whole world knows it. We'll make the audience wait for it a little bit longer. We won't be the first thing Mary sings. Make 'em wait, make 'em wait. So we wrote Practically Perfect, wondering how they'd ever miss that as a title because it seems so perfect in the film where the measurements come up and they say, "What's your measurement, Mary Poppins?" She puts the tape measure up and it says Mary Poppins practically perfect in every way. It just seemed too good to miss. So we wrote this song called Practically Perfect, finished playing it. Robert had tears rolling down his cheeks and he clapped and cheered. So did Elizabeth. And he stood up and he said, "That's the best song I never wrote."
Oh, that is just wonderful.
Which I thought was such a gorgeous thing to say. That was so generous.
And the relief that you must have felt that they liked it and you hadn't offended them.
Oh, we were just thrilled. And Robert was equally generous. I mean, he was slightly more circumspect because, I think both of them felt that they were not yet written out on the subject of Mary Poppins, particularly as the whole thing, as the film documents so clearly, that the relationship with Pamela Travers, who wrote the original stories, was a very fractious one during the writing of the film.
Absolutely.
And they'd had a tough time. In fact, I think it quite scarred them because Pamela kept saying, "I don't understand why we have to have new songs. Why can't they just sing Pop Goes the Weasel?"
Oh, good
And
grief.
things like that, which I think they found incredibly insulting. I don't think she was trying to be insulting. She just didn't understand how it worked when new songwriters wrote new songs to fit in with the story, which is a bit strange of her, but she was a very particular woman, I believe.
And then for them to then be so generous with you and Ants because you were adding music to their property.
And changing their songs too, yeah. No, and that was the bit that I was really anxious about. And I always said, I do hope you understand that this is because now the song is in a different dramatic situation. It needs to have some things changed and added. And they absolutely understood that and they supported it wholeheartedly. It was a joyous experience working with them.
Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad because you hear such horror stories, don't you? Especially in our business about people being absolute idiots. So it's lovely when they're just the best of people.
I just tried to put myself in their situation and think if it was my masterpiece that somebody was tampering with, if I could be that gracious, then that would be a great thing.
Oh, how wonderful.
I think I'd find it very hard, but they were an absolute life lesson in how to be as human beings.
That's brilliant, George. Oh, I just love that kind of circularity that Chitty Chitty Bang Bang was the first musical you saw on screen, and then you end up having this wonderful creative experience with them. That's wonderful.
I know it's almost too good to be true, isn't it?
I grew up listening to Mary Poppins on an LP. My mum used to sit me with headphones like this, listening to an LP, which was a narration with some of the songs in it, but they were re-recorded. This must have been in like 1979, 1980. And there was a narration and songs. Richard Sherman was the voice of Uncle Albert on that LP.
Oh, was he?
Yeah. And so, his voice was part of my first Mary Poppins experience, as well as his words and music, which was just fabulous. So, George, my next question. What happened next? Where did you first personally get involved with musical theatre?
This is a complicated answer. The first part is that after I went to school and did my A levels, I had no idea what to do next because I had done A levels in geography, history, and English, but not in music, because at that stage, I didn't really realize that I would make music a kind of academic as well as a entire life involvement study for me. So I was a bit stumped. I didn't know what to do about going to university. Everyone was busy applying to Oxford and Cambridge, and I didn't feel clever enough to do that. So I thought, I don't think I want to go to university. So I talked to a really nice history teacher at my school who was also very musical. And he said, surely you want to do something with music, don't you? And I said, well, that would be lovely, but I don't know what. And he said, well, why don't you go and do a year's teaching at a prep school and think about what you want to do next? And he said, if you go to one of the prep schools that I know, he said, they've got such amazing music facilities. And at that stage, I'd just taken up the church organ, which was kind of the big passion of my life. I'd been playing the piano, as I told you, since I was 6. And I'd taken up the church organ when I was 16. And I'd gone from like 0 to 60 in no seconds at all. I went from grade 1 to grade 8 in about a year and a half. And I was loving it. And I applied for all of the London colleges of music to study the organ. And they all said, considering you've only been playing for 18 months, you're really not bad, but we're not quite good enough to come here. So come back in a year's time and try again. So I thought this idea of going to work in a prep school for a year where I would do some general teaching and play the organ a lot and do lots of music was quite a good idea. So I applied to a bunch of places and drove around that summer, meeting various headmasters and directors of music in all of the southern counties of Great Britain. It was a very lovely memory. Sort of, it was high summer, I'd done my A levels, the flowers were blooming, the bees were buzzing, and I was driving around seeing all these amazing places. And I ended up at Ascot, which is, as you know, where the races are run, Royal Ascot every year.
Yeah.
And there's a little school there which rejoices in the name of Papelwick School. And I became a student teacher for a year at Papelwick, which had an amazing music department and a lovely church organ. And I played the organ like a fool most days, practicing. And I met wonderful people, including the history teacher, a man called Stephen Crowley. And Stephen decided that it would be fun with my penchant for music and for pop music if we tried to write a little musical together. And he had an idea that it could be on the subject of the Children's Crusade.
Right.
There was in about 1187, I believe, a crusade of children that left London and marched all the way to Jerusalem to try and persuade the naughty infidels that they should love Jesus instead of Allah.
Oh my gosh.
I know, what a crazy thing. And they were led by this child called Stephen, who was, by all accounts, quite a charismatic and magical figure. So we wrote a musical about Stephen, and it lasted probably only about 45 minutes. And there were a bunch of songs, and I made them very poppy. And my friends from my band at school, including Toby Marlowe's dad, Andy, came and played in the show with me. I had drums, guitar, bass, and me on the synthesizer and the grand piano, and my friend Paul Cheater also playing the piano. And the kids just adored it because it felt like they were in a pop band on TV, and they all wore jeans and colored t-shirts. And it was very, very simple, but it absolutely went off like a firecracker. And we performed it in the chapel. And I even managed to play the organ for some of it as well at the same time. And I just remember loving it.
Same time as learning the organ, you had a pop band as well, and you were playing the piano. It sounds like it was a huge, varied mix of music.
That's absolutely right. At school, I had sung in the choir pretty much every day because there was either assembly, which was just hymns with a piano, and often I played the piano for those hymns because there was a sort of rota of students who would do that, as well as a few of the teachers. And on every other morning, it was chapel, and chapel would happen in the chapel, obviously. And then you'd be accompanied by the organ. And as I started to learn the organ, I started to play that for the chapel services as well. And I was 16, and it was 1979. Pop was everything to every kid of that age. So, what I wasn't playing church music, I was listening to the latest album by Cream or Deep Purple or Genesis or Supertramp. And like you, clamped with my headphones and my record player in my study, absolutely geeking out to this stuff. And I just wanted to have as many different sorts of music in my life as I possibly could.
That's fantastic, because also then when you become a composer and, like you're writing this show about, was it called Stephen? Was it called The Children's Crusade?
No, it was called Stephen.
Stephen. And you have all this wide scope of music then to draw on. You're not just in one genre. It's like everything. That's fantastic. What was it about the organ that excited you? Whenever I see an organ, there just looks like so much stuff that it's quite daunting,
Yes, it's the multiple keyboards and the pedals and all the stops, the voices that you can select to play the different sounds. I think it was partly that. You felt like a mad professor pedaling away on this thing. And I think I loved the power that the organist had in a church or a cathedral. The sheer volume that the organ can create, I think, was also what attracted to me in my megalomaniac side.
I was talking to Chris Nightingale about this very thing just yesterday, and he was an organ scholar in Durham. And he said you could play the organ in Durham Cathedral, and it had this one, did he say a 32 or a D or something? Am I making that
A
up?
32-foot pipe, yes.
Yeah.
That's the lowest bass pipe.
And you could only play it on certain occasions because it was so loud that it would shake the foundations of the cathedral.
No, they are, because the deepest bass pipes reverberate at such a slow rate that they are actually structurally damaging, because they sort of go whoa, 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 whoa. The beat of the air is so slow that you can hear every single vibration.
Wow.
But the effect, it's sort of, you feel it there. It's right in your sternum. It's like standing next to the bass speakers in a club. You get this amazing sort of feeling through your chest.
If you can imagine, a world without amplified music for like hundreds of years that our ancestors lived through, to go to church and hear that sound and sing along in a hymn, that must have been like the equivalent of going to a club or something like that, of listening to this incredible sound and feeling part of it in a communal sense. Must have been mind-blowing for people that weren't used to.
No, that's a very good observation, Caroline. Collective music making was probably even more thrilling hundreds of years ago, because there was no instant access to music in any other way. But if you went to a big church and you heard everyone singing and the organ playing, it must have absolutely made the hair stand up on your neck. I mean, you just imagine people going to there and literally their eyes bulging with surprise that they'd never heard anything like this. What is going on? Before amplifiers and before speakers, yes.
That's fabulous. We take so much for granted these days, don't we? I don't really think about things like that until you sort of go, oh, well, of course, that wouldn't have been the case. So my next question, is there a musical, apart from obviously your own, which I'm sure you've seen hundreds of times, which musical have you seen the most?
Well, I suppose the answer is not my own, but it's one I'm involved with. It's Six.
Yes.
I have seen Six dozens and dozens and dozens of times in different places around the world.
And you must have seen that development from that first, although, like you said, it was an absolutely incredible night. How does that feel to then see it, opening on Broadway? I know it was a bit mad when it opened on Broadway because of COVID and everything, but...
Yes, of course, we had the opening night that turned out to be the night that Broadway closed. That was actually our opening night of the original production of Six on Broadway. We'd done all the previews, the audiences were going nuts for it, and literally on that day, I was in New York actually doing a workshop of a new show that Anthony and I have written called Becoming Nancy, with the director choreographer Jerry Mitchell. And we just about managed to get our workshop performance, because we'd been rehearsing for a week, had a wonderful cast, and it was supposed to be packed with producers coming along to see it, and friends and well-wishers. And most people cried off because they were getting so worried about COVID. And I remember as we walked out afterwards, I was with Hugh. We were walking down the street back to the hotel to get changed for the opening night of Six. And behind me, one of our producers on Becoming Nancy, Hal Luftig, came up and said, I thought I should tell you, baby, I don't think you're going to get your opening night tonight, I'm afraid. They're going to close Broadway. I've just been with the League of American Theatre Producers, and this is the bad news. You're about to get a phone call. And literally, as he walked away, my mobile rang, and it was Kenny, and he said, I'm afraid we're off. And I couldn't believe it.
That's like something out of a movie.
I know.
Yeah.
So we went back and had a quiet evening at the hotel, and immediately tried to change our flight for an earlier flight back home. We were worried that Trump would close America very quickly, and that would be that, which actually in the end he didn't. We managed to get an earlier flight home, mercifully. And the rest of the cast and a lot of the creatives went out and had a party at at the Glass House Tavern right next to the theatre in 47th Street because they were all so devastated. And most of the people at that party caught COVID.
Oh, God.
Nobody was seriously ill, but most people were ill and then had to isolate. But we did the wise thing and stayed at home, mercifully.
So talk to me about Six then, Ants. Not Ants. Oh my God. I'm so sorry, George.
Don't worry.
You must get that all the time.
There are worse things you could say.
I'm so sorry. I'm not concentrating. Talk to me about Six and how it feels for you to watch that over and over again with all these different fabulous cast members, band members, everything.
The thing about watching Six in different countries and in sometimes different languages is just the miracle that a story that seems so specific, six wives of a long dead Tudor king brought back from the dead hundreds of years later to tell their stories, that idea can speak across nations, across generations, and across cultures in such a powerful way never ceases to thrill me, because that is what musical theatre can do so brilliantly. It can speak to people in a very fundamental way.
Absolutely.
It is almost like a modern church, isn't it? It's a kind of religion if you get a good one. It's a kind of religious experience, yes.
That shared experience again.
It is a shared experience.
Yeah.
And that is probably the reason why I can stand seeing it again and again and again. That and the fact that I always find something new to enjoy and admire about it in the score and in the lyrics.
You must be so proud of them. And I guess as a composer, I imagine, I know I as an actor go and I look at the acting performances and like either get slightly jealous or like, you know, massive admiration. How is that for you going to the theatre and having to watch other people's compositional work, I guess?
That's a very good question. I think I love watching other people be great. And there is never any side of me that feels jealous because I just know it's not my bag. I could never have done it. It had to come from young people. When we were very young, Ants and I were lucky enough to meet people like Tim Rice and Angelo Webber, Cameron McIntosh. And I remember Tim Rice saying to me, because I think I said, where do you think the next big trend is going to come in musical theatre? And he said, I couldn't tell you. He said, all I know is it will come from left field. It will come from somewhere unexpected, and it will probably be to do with pop. And he was absolutely right, of course. I mean, if you think of Hamilton, if you think of any of the great shows,
Rent,
exactly, of times since then, which was 1985 when he said that. I thought that was very, very wise of him. It's easy to sit there and admire something you know you couldn't do. But also, Anthony and I have spent a lot of our time in recent years encouraging and mentoring younger writers coming up through, because we were lucky enough to have people do that to us. And I love the idea of passing the torch.
am I right in thinking you won some kind of scheme with Camerons or something like that? Is there something I'm missing there?
No, you're all virtually right. It was called the Vivian Ellis Prize. And Vivian was a wonderful composer of British musicals in the 20s and 30s. He was at the time almost as successful as George Gershwin. Vivian was being celebrated by the Performing Rights Society for his 80th birthday. And they formed a competition called the Vivian Ellis Prize. It was held at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama. We came up having entered 2 songs and a synopsis from our new musical Just So, which we were in the middle of writing. And we watched these brilliantly talented young students perform our 2 songs. And we were in competition with, I can't remember, about 15 other shows. And we were absolutely convinced that we haven't got a hope in hell of doing well in the competition. And we sat there in April 1985 in a packed audience. And right behind us was sitting no one lesser than Alan J. Lerner of Lerner and Lowe.
Wow.
And on stage, the judges were Cameron McIntosh, Andrew Lloyd Webber, Don Black, Tim Rice, and John Hosier, the head of the Guildhall School of Music and Drama, as well as Vivian Ellis himself. And unbelievably, it came to the announcement and they said, and the winner is Just So by George Stiles and Anthony Drew. And Alan J. Lerner leant forward and said to Anthony, they picked the right show.
Ah, that's wonderful.
So that was lovely. And then we were having our photograph taken on stage afterwards. And Cameron said to me in my ear, what are you going to do with it now? And I haven't got a clue what to say. So I just said, I don't know. What are you going to do with it? And he said, well, actually, I think it's really interesting. I'd love to come and see your first production. Will you invite me? And he said, and if you need anything, here's my card. Give my secretary a call and we'll see if we can help you. And we did need some help with the sound equipment. So we gave him a ring and he gave us Andrew Bruce from Autograph autograph sound to help us.
Wow. Oh my God. That's amazing.
And Andrew and Autograph came down and gave us some sound equipment because we were doing it on an absolute budget of a shoestring.
Yeah.
And the other lovely thing from that moment, having our photos taken, is that I was shaking Vivian Ellis's hand. And he said, I want you to know that when you shake my hand, you're only 5 handshakes away from Beethoven.
I love this
I said,
story.
I'm sorry, how does that work? And he said, well, as you probably know, I was very good friends with George Gershwin, who was absolutely one of my complete heroes already, because they'd been successes both sides of the Atlantic, as I was saying earlier. They both had shows running all over the world. So he said, and you probably know that Gershwin studied with Maurice Ravel, the composer, to learn about orchestrations. And I did know that because I'd done my dissertation at university on Porgy and Bess, which is why Gershwin took himself off to study with Ravel, because he wanted to do his own orchestrations. Because when he was writing his Broadway musicals, he didn't tend to write his own orchestrations because they were written so quickly. They had a team of people that would help with the orchestrations, which is why that is still the tradition that continues to this day. Composers for Broadway and West End musicals very rarely write their own orchestrations. I've never written mine. But Gershwin had studied with Ravel, and he said, so that's me, Gershwin, Ravel, that's 3 handshakes. And Ravel, when he was a very young student, met a very old Ludwig van Beethoven. So that's 4 handshakes. So, and then you add me, that's 5. So now when I shake people's hands, they're only 5 handshakes away from Beethoven.
That is incredible. That thread.
And that blew my mind about just how tiny history is. You know, you think it's these hundreds of years, and actually there are people living who've got a memory all that way back.
A contact back then. I love that story. I've heard you've told me that before, and I tell it to other people.
I've bored you with it before.
No, not at all. I'll tell other people it. It's absolutely fabulous.
No, it's a good one.
I would never be bored of that. What was I going to say? Okay, on to my next question. Which musical has made you laugh the most, and which musicals made you cry the most?
Cry the most, no doubt, Merrily We Roll Along
Wow.
by Stephen Sondheim.
Yeah.
And that's because it is about the process of writing and about the friendships that are made between people who write together and what happens to those as you get older. The innocence and the hope you have when you're young, and how that inevitably crystallizes and hardens a bit as experience and life wears away at you. But it's still a musical that's full of hope. But there's no question that when it gets to the end of the show, you know, Our Time, when they're up on the roof watching the Sputnik, and there's that gorgeous vamp, bum bum da da da. It's our time, breathe it in, worlds da da, and worlds to win. Sorry, Steve, for getting your lyric wrong. Yeah, I sat at the Many a Chocolate Factory when Maria did her production a few years ago, and Jenna Russell was in it, and Damien Humbly. Can't remember the rest of the principal cast, but
Mark Umbers.
I literally just rocked and sobbed. It just got me so there. Because just that whole thing of what it is, you know, because I've been writing with Anthony since we were students together at Exeter.
Yeah.
And we've had our ups and we've had our downs. Luckily, we've had an awful lot of ups. It just got me. And I had to apologize to the person sitting next to me, because right at this very quiet moment, I was like,
oh, George.
I love Steve for that he can do that to you. His work can.
It's a personal musical for him as well. I don't know if it's particularly autobiographical, but probably his most autobiographical, just because he's writing about writing.
Yeah, no question. It was hugely personal to him. It was, of course, the ultimate irony that it then became the hottest ticket on Broadway, having been the musical that closed before it even opened.
Yeah, yeah.
But it then became the hottest musical. Yes, last year, the year before last on Broadway, it was the hottest ticket in town. But of course, he'd had to have died for that to become the case, which was so sad.
That's not what you want, is it? Really?
It's not what you want.
No.
I suppose the one that makes me laugh the most is possibly Little Shop of Horrors.
Oh, fabulous.
She's absolutely one of my all-time favourite shows.
Oh, I love that. It's a great show, isn't it?
Absolutely brilliant. That was another great sadness, is that Howard Ashman, who wrote the lyrics, died so young because he had so much more to give, I think.
He really did.
That's the catalogue of songs that we're always going to miss, sadly.
Yeah, they did it in Amdram when I was younger, and it was a different local company to me that I went and watched. And I just remember being utterly obsessed with it. I think probably they weren't allowed to, but they filmed it and I managed to get the VHS of it and I would watch it over and over again. I've never been in it, but I do adore.
Have you not?
No, they've missed a treat there, haven't they? I think I'd been a rather good Audrey.
They have. You've been a wonderful Audrey, yes.
I could be Mrs. Mushnick maybe one day if they do a gender bending one. So my next question, I call it my I've not seen West Side Story question because I haven't seen a professional production of West Side Story and I regret it. Is there a musical that you haven't seen or that maybe you wish you'd seen?
There are plenty that I've seen I wished I hadn't, but I would say that if there was something I couldn't really blame myself for missing it because I wasn't alive, but if I could take myself back in time to Broadway in the 30s and see some of the Gershwin opening nights, particularly Porgy and Bess, that would be amazing because that must have been such an exciting time. Well, of course, Porgy and Bess is really an opera, but it's so much in the style of musical theatre. So you've got wonderful songs like It Ain't Necessarily So. And
It's almost like the first sung through musical, isn't it?
yeah, almost is. Yes.
I actually had to do a project on Porgy and Bess when I was at college, so I know a little bit
Did you?
about it. Yeah, I had to do a talk about it. We were all given topics, and mine was talk about whether Porgy and Bess is a musical or an opera. And I think in this day and age, we would probably call it a musical because we now had all these through-sung musicals. But back then, that wasn't called a musical, really, was it?
No, it was very much a commission from an opera house that Gershwin took. And he had many aspirations as a serious composer. And so he wanted to take that commission and do his best to move his game up. But of course, there's Rhapsody in Blue, there's Porgy and Bess. There's so much that he wrote, An American in Paris, that is really fantastically complicated and complex musical achievement. So there's no question that when you take his output as a whole, particularly that he died at a mere 38 years old,
Yeah.
the amount he wrote in such a short life that is absolutely solid gold is extraordinary.
Oh, absolutely. I think with George Gershwin, I know many people die before their time, but to have achieved the amount that he achieved in such a short space of time for somebody so young, the input he could have had, the output he could have had, if he'd lived an average length life. Imagine, I just sort of mourn the music we didn't get and celebrate the music that we did. I don't remember first hearing George Gershwin music because I feel like it's always been around, but to have been around when it wasn't there and then you're hearing it for the first time must be incredible.
It was somebody like me who really just couldn't be kept away from a piano.
Yeah.
If he ever went to a party, he would always find the piano and sit down and start playing. I would love to have been at one of those parties. Can you imagine?
But you've almost shaken his hand, George.
I almost have. You're absolutely right. Only one handshake away from George, which is a thrilling thought.
Oh my gosh. But yeah, to be at a party and he just get on the piano and start noodling around. Let's have a little break, George, and we shall come back and I shall ask you my final few questions after the break, if that's okay.
G'day listeners, another show you can find on the Bloop Network is Thrash and Treasure, where legendary artists from Broadway, West End, Hollywood and beyond deep dive into two seemingly opposite genres of music, heavy metal and musical theatre. From Tony winners to reality TV contestants, hear a vast range of iconic guests, learn about genres of music they've never been exposed to. With over 130 episodes, there's bound to be a silly, sassy and insightful conversation that'll have you reaching for the leather pants and hairspray. And here is a sneak peek. That's my script. We're back with Thrash and Treasure. I'm Aaron, but I'm merrily popping along with Anthony Drew.
It wasn't right, but it was on its journey to becoming more right.
Yep, it was just so.
It was just so, as one of the critics wrote, I think.
Sorry, I don't mean to bring up that then. I didn't know that. Oh no, foot and mouth. That's just been clever. Sorry.
The following year, 1990,
Yep.
It was done at the then Tricycle Theatre in Kilburn in North London. And then it was actually Steven Spielberg, straight after it had been on at the Kilburn Theatre, somebody from Spielberg's animation department, which was then called Amblimation, had seen the show. And Cameron got a letter from Steven Spielberg saying, I haven't seen it, I've heard about it, I wanted. So he paid us a lot of money to buy the film rights for Just So. So George and I and Cameron flew out to Hollywood, which we'd never been to before, and we spent 2 weeks working with Steven Spielberg on how we were going to turn our little show into a feature animation. And sadly, it never happened. And by the time we were getting closer to getting the script better, we'd seen the designs of the characters, we'd seen designs of the backgrounds, because it was going to be made in Europe, because Spielberg thought that Disney had all the best animators in America, so he was going to set up his own animation studio over here. But then DreamWorks SKG happened, and Jeffrey Katzenberg, who was then head of their animation, wanted all new projects, nothing that was a hanging on from Amblin days. So sadly, Just So didn't ever happen. And nor did Cats as an animation, with a screenplay by Tom Stoppard, which they were working on, which would have been very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And another one called Carnival.
Audience at home, you wouldn't have seen my arms go crazy when he was like, just casually Steven Spielberg optioned his musical.
He was really lovely. He was such a regular guy. In fact, while we were with him for 2 weeks, we were staying at the Universal Sheraton. They got a car for us to drive down the hill and round the corner and into the Amblin lot, at Universal Studios. You could almost have walked quicker, but they wanted us to have a car because everyone drives in Hollywood. But he was lovely. And for the following 2 years, I got a Christmas present from him. I had the first time it was a great big wicker hamper of baked goods like zucchini bread and things like that. And the second year, it was a toy megaphone that could change your voice. So depending on which setting, you were either a robot or an alien or a baby. And you spoke with your normal voice and it projected this weird sound out the other end.
God, I'm having conniption fits inside right now, ladies and gentlemen. Steven Spielberg just casually gives you fucking Christmas presents. Oh my God, fathers. I'm not at all jealous. I'm not jealous at all.
He's an extraordinary brain. And going to they call them bungalows at Universal Studios. Each apartment has its own bungalow. So Amblin Bungalow, which is the one we were at, we go on those little golf cart things to get to it and to get to the canteen for lunch and everything. The door knocker was E.T. in brass. There was a well in the garden with the jaws shark coming up out of it.
God,
And because he was working on Jurassic Park at that time, it was way ahead of it, but he was working on it.
Don't tell me this.
The room was full of giant, cuddly Tyrannosaurus Rexes and stuff. And we had to keep going into that room because that's where the keyboard was that George and I performed the songs on to Steven Spielberg.
I feel faint.
So given that the show hadn't transferred, at least the Spielberg thing of it kind of felt like an exciting step on its gestation. But after that didn't happen, and we started moving on to Hong Kong, Peter Pan, and various other shows.
Welcome back, and thank you for listening. After that interval, or intermission, as they say in the States, we're going to crack on and hear more from our fabulous George Stiles. Thank you for coming back, George.
I had nowhere I had to be, Caroline, so you were the best offer I had all day.
So you might as well be here.
Mm-hmm.
So, George, my next question is, if you were in charge of schools in our country, what musical would you put on the school curriculum?
Well, the funny thing is, my answer to this question is that one of our shows has actually already been on a national curriculum.
Has it really?
And that is Honk.
Oh,
Our
fabulous.
musical about the ugly duckling was on the national curriculum for a few years in Israel, of all places.
Oh, how wonderful.
Yeah, the government decided that everyone in Israel should understand the message of tolerance that show has at its heart. Because The Ugly Duckling is a story about accepting somebody who looks different from you.
Absolutely. My experience of Honk is going to see the incredible production at the National, which I think Julia Mackenzie directed. Am I right?
She did indeed. Absolutely. Yeah.
And seeing David Bamber as a frog dancing away.
You saw David Bamber as a rather overexcited goose.
Goose.
Who leads a platoon of geese who try to get Ugly back to his long lost mum.
I also know that there's a few songs from Honk on one of the musical theatre syllabuses. I think it's Trinity or something. But, musical theatre singing is now being something you can take exams in. And I saw Different on there just this week doing some teaching.
Oh, lovely.
It is a lovely show, Honk. Where did that come from? What was the conversation about deciding to do The Ugly Duckling?
Honk was written for two reasons. One was we were desperate to try and write something with a strong storyline. And we'd been busy writing Just So, which was our adaptation of Rudyard Kipling's Just So stories, for about 5 years. Enquiries. We started it in 1985. It was what was entered into the Vivian Ellis Prize I was telling you about earlier. And we had several cracks at it. The first at the Watermill Theatre in Newbury in the UK,
My favourite place.
where it was directed by Julia Mackenzie. The second at the Tricycle Theatre, now called the Kiln in Kilburn, directed by Mike Ockrent and choreographed by Anthony Van Last. And that
Wow.
one was supposed to transfer to the Wyndham's Theatre if it was a big success. Unfortunately, it wasn't quite the success that Cameron wanted it to be, because by then Cameron was co-producing it.
Right.
And he sold the rights to Steven Spielberg to make it into an animated movie. So we spent all of these years writing and rewriting and trying to get this musical right. And at the opening night in Kilburn, Nick Heitner, who I'd been lucky enough to work with when I was a student at the Northcote Theatre, came up to us and said, "Well done, boys. It's about as good as you're going to get it. But whatever you do, please now write something new. I want to hear what else you've got to say."
Oh, interesting.
And it was great advice, because we really did need to not just keep stirring the same old pot of porridge. And I went off on a holiday to Australia, and Anthony was reading a volume of Hans Andersen's fairy tales, because Paul Michel Schoenberg had briefly asked him if he would look at doing the English lyrics for an adaptation of one of his stories that they were looking at writing. And that didn't come off, that particular project, but he was very taken with reading all the stories. And he read various tales, and he got to The Ugly Duckling, and he immediately thought of his nephews, who were very young at that stage and were in school. His sister Jan married a lovely man called Aslam Akhtar, who was born in Pakistan. And so their children were, of course, mixed race kids. And in school, they received a lot of racial bullying. They got called all sorts of names. And he used to say to them, "You just need to tell people you're just different, that's all." And the idea came to him that the whole story could be an allegory for acceptance of people who are different in some way. And he just immediately started writing. He got up every morning. He'd read that writers who succeed generally get up early in the morning, make a cup of tea, sit at their desks, and don't do anything else until they've written 500 words at least. So he wrote his 500 words every morning. And when I got back from my holiday in Australia, he picked me and Hugh up from the airport. And as I sat in the passenger seat next to him, he said, "Here you are, here's our next musical." And he thrust a bunch of paper into my lap. And I said, "Well, what is it?" And he said, "It's based on The Ugly Duckling, and we're going to do it at the Watermill Theatre in Newbury, because Jill doesn't have a show for Christmas." Jill being Jill Fraser, who then ran the theatre. And he had rung her when he'd had the idea and said, "Have you got a show for Christmas?" And she said, "No, why? What have you got?" And he said, "Well, what about an adaptation of The Ugly Duckling?" Or, as he called it then, the aesthetically challenged farmyard fowl. We wrote it for that Christmas we literally wrote the whole thing in about 16 weeks.
Wow.
And off we went. And it became clear that title was rather too long for a poster. Honk, or the aesthetically challenged farmyard fowl. So Honk, ! Became the much easier and punchier title.
It's a great title. Sometimes the challenge isn't it, in a musical, to find the right title for it. Something that you would think was simple, actually, it's like naming your child. It's quite a responsibility.
No, that's a very, very good observation. A particular case in point is another show of ours, Betty Blue Eyes.
Yes.
When we first wrote it, was called A Private Function, the musical, as you probably know, with our lovely friends from Los Angeles, Ron Cowan and Daniel Lippman, whose idea it was to adapt it. They were watching the film one night in a hotel room in Toronto when they were working on Queer as Folk, the American version. And as Dan was watching the film, Ron had gone on to bed, I think, and Dan was sitting up late watching this film. And he suddenly said, "The pig is singing to me." And he thought this could definitely be a musical. So we had called the adaptation A Private Function, the musical. And then when we eventually took it to Cameron to see if he'd like to produce it, because he wouldn't shut up about saying, "What's your next project? I want to hear it. I want to hear it." We played it to him and he said, "I think it's great, but I think we need to change the title." So he produced a poster, a mock-up poster of Betty Blue Eyes, which he presented to us over a lunch in Charlotte Street. He said, "Here's what I think we should call the show. Look, it worked for Pygmalion. Pygmalion, the musical, will forever be My Fair Lady." And it didn't hurt that. And of course, to be compared to one of the greatest musicals of all time is very flattering. So we thought, well, maybe Betty Blue Eyes is a better title. But the problem was it told you nothing about the show. And because the image on the poster was all about the pig, I think a lot of people thought it was Babe the musical. The great thing about a good title is it tells you something about the show. And it was difficult. I think, there are lots of reasons why Betty didn't quite take off first time round, but remains one of the shows I'm most proud of.
It's a really wonderful show. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? I don't know if A Private Function would have been the right title either. And Betty Blue Eyes in the show is such a wonderful part of the show, the song.
Thank you. Yes, no, it's a good song.
Maybe the title gave that away then by the time you get to the song. I don't know. But yeah, it's a fantastic show. Fantastic show. So my next question, is there a musical which has brought you closest to ending your lifelong love of musicals?
I'm far too wise a man, Caroline, to tell you the musicals that have made me want to leave the theatre screaming.
Nobody's admitting it.
There is quite a long list, but I will turn it around on myself and say that one of those moments was actually about a show of our own.
Oh, no.
Anthony and I took ourselves off to see a production by amateurs of our musical somewhere in Kent, I think in a church hall of all places. This was of Just So. And when we arrived at this little church hall, there were posters up outside, all down the street, and someone had gone along clearly in haste with some day glow stickers in green on which was printed in huge type, "Some scenes may offend."
Oh, no.
This is a musical written for a family audience that was based on Rudyard Kipling's timeless children's stories. How on earth could a musical for kids and families have scenes that may offend? But somebody in the producing team had got aerated about a scene that they had staged.
Right.
There was a song that the Rhinos sung, and one of the lyrics is, "Them fellas once approached me to ask if they could hack a portion of my horn off as an aphrodisiac. I told them it's a fantasy. I never pull the birds. My body language seems to speak in four-letter words." And because of this line about hacking a bit of his horn off, the producer had given the character playing a rhino, who I believe was actually female, which is not how we wrote the score. We wrote it for a boy. They'd given the rhino a massive horn on the front of their head, and the actor was doing all kinds of lewd things with this horn in the performance.
Oh, no.
And that is apparently the scene that may offend. So we went straight up to the producer of the show and said, "How on earth can you have brought our perfectly charming musical into such disrepute as having to slap stickers on that say some scenes may offend?" I said, "It's enough to make me want to give up writing. How dare you? How very dare you?"
Oh, well, I think you're allowed to have that one as something that brought you close to.
That nearly ended it, yeah.
Right. Is there a musical which has had the most impact on you and your life, and maybe like your life choices? Or have you ever gone to see something and gone, "Oh, I'm going to live my life differently from now on"?
Lovely question. It's interesting because it was a very early experience. It was really why Anthony and I started writing. We went to see a little production of Sondheim's Sweeney Todd in Plymouth in 1983, maybe it was, the year that the Theatre Royal Plymouth opened. They did a production in their studio theatre, which was called The Drum of Sweeney Todd. I had seen the show in London at Drury Lane with Sheila Hancock and Dennis Quilley, and I'd admired it. I'd seen it from the back of the gods because I hadn't got in with the in crowd, and I didn't get front row stall seats in those days. And it had left me slightly cold. I mean, I'd sort of admired it, but it hadn't spoken to me. And then Anthony and I drove down on what should have been the last night of a musical that his brother had written, that Anthony had directed at the Northcote Theatre, which is in the middle of the university in Exeter, where we were both studying. And I was starring in this musical alongside Anthony, but there'd been a mess up with the bookings at the theatre. And for some reason, they hadn't got the Saturday night of the week's run available. So our run ended curtailed on the Friday night. We only got 4 nights to play the show. So instead of just going and drowning our sorrows in the student pub, we drove down to Plymouth to see this production of Sweeney Todd. And I'm very glad we did, because it was the most extraordinary thing. There were just, I think, 8 actors doing the entire show, and a band, I think, of 4 or 5. I think Martin Waddington was the MD and the arranger, and the director was a lovely actor who turned director called David Kelsey, sadly long dead. But David had directed the show in the most stunning way. Because it was in a studio space, he'd arranged it like a little galleried theatre of 2 levels. There was a stalls and then there was a circle that wrapped right around the stage. So it was like a thrust stage. And the feeling was that Sweeney could literally have stepped out from behind any seat and slit your throat next. It really was compelling. And what I loved about it was the fact that the musical could make you cry and laugh in the same sentence sometimes, and that you could actually care for this monstrous mass murderer. You could understand why he was the way he was, what had driven him to psychotic behavior, because, the system in the Victorian Britain had been so cruel to him and sent him off to Australia to be a convict. And he'd managed to escape and get home. And I just loved the contrast of the fact you could have a man singing a love song to his razors that he was going to use to kill people. These are my friends, see how they glisten. Such a beautiful song. And I just thought, this is so bold. You can write a love song to a razor, and you can write a comedy song about who you're going to make into a pie next. Little priest at the end of Act One of the great end Act Ones, which whips the audience into such a fervor of laughter that they're almost taken out of the story for about 15 minutes. And then, of course, at the end, he thunders, "I'll come again when you have judge on the menu. They all deserve to die. Even you, Mrs. Lovett, even I." It's so brilliant. The rhythm changes, the meter changes, the sheer terror that it struck in your heart. So we drove back to Exeter from Plymouth that night, 37-mile drive in my little Fiat car, high on life and absolutely blown away by what musical theatre could be, that it didn't have to just be Jerry Herman show tunes and high kicks, that it could be something that was actually challenging and unexpected. And we decided on the way back that we would have a crack at writing a musical ourselves. And the next morning we went in and met with our friend Stuart Trotter, who ran the Northcote Theatre in those days, where we'd been doing our show and where I'd been writing music for professional productions while still a student at the university. And we said to Stuart, we wondered if we could book the theatre for a week next March. We're going to write a musical. And such was his faith and belief in both of us that he said, go on then, what's it going to be about? And we said, we've no idea. He said, come back to me when you know what it is, but yes, you can have the week.
Oh,
It
fantastic.
will cost you £2,750 for the hire of the theatre for a week. So make sure you find the money.
Yeah, crikey.
So we booked the theatre and had a bill in our pockets, and we went off and we wrote a musical about the discovery of King Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, and decided that we would tell not just that story, but would also tell simultaneously the story of his death and burial in 1350 BC. And we would link the ancient Egyptian belief in the afterlife, and that the fact that when any dead person's name is spoken again by the living, they live again.
Yeah.
That was their fundamental belief of reincarnation, is that speaking a person's name literally brought them back to life. So in a way, the discovery of his tomb did make Tutankhamun live again, which we thought was a very theatrical and poetic idea. So we set to work, and a year later, we opened our show at the Northcote Theatre and haven't stopped since.
Oh,
All thanks to Stephen Sondheim.
yeah. Am I right in thinking that he had some input in your career, didn't he? Was it partly to do with one of the courses that he did at Oxford? Or were you part of that when he was
No, that's a very good memory. Cameron Mackintosh asked him to become the visiting professor of theatre at Oxford, because Cameron was asked to organise a chair of theatre
Right.
at St Catherine's College, which happened, I think, for about 12 or 15 years. And Sondheim was the first person in the chair. And basically, Cameron and Steve invited any up-and-coming young writers they knew to come along and be a part of this organisation or of this event over the course of, I think, 3 terms a year. And Anthony and I were not invited because by that stage, we had already met Steve, because he'd come at Julia Mackenzie's request to see Just So at the Watermill Theatre in Newbury, and had given us a brilliant set of notes, which were perhaps the best writing notes I've ever received. He very, very wisely said, I sat there for the first 15 minutes and I thought, what am I doing in this theatre? And he said, I know why I'm here, because my friend Julia has asked me to come. And he said, and I know I'm being entertained. But he said, I didn't really know why I was here until the Elephant's Child, about 15 minutes into the show, sang, there's no harm in asking why everything should be just so. He said, right, now I know why I'm here. This is about a child who asks too many questions. And is there such a thing as asking too many questions? And he said, you know Sweeney Todd, right? And I said, do we know it? It's the reason we're here writing. And he said, well, take a little example by that. What I did in that is what Arthur Wing Pinero set out as his rules for all playwriting. Tell them what you're going to do it, and then tell them you've done it. So you get the Ballad of Sweeney Todd, attend the Tale of Sweeney Todd, the opening number. Then you have the show, which obviously is what you're going to do. And then at the end, you go back to that with the epilogue, attend the Tale of Sweeney Todd, which is the finishing of it as well. And it makes this brilliant story cycle. And he's absolutely right. And that was a brilliant note. And then we've become friends even further with him while Julia was starring in his Follies at the Shaftesbury Theatre a few years later. And we'd had several conversations with him then. And indeed, when we came to write Honk, by that stage, we were quite regularly in email correspondence with Steve. And Honk was at the National Theatre, the first ever British musical to be played at the National Theatre, scandalously.
Wow. Yeah.
In the Christmas of 1999. And we got this email one morning. I couldn't believe it. It said Stephen Sondheim on the from box and said last night ... And it just said, dear boys, I was walking over Waterloo Bridge last night, and through the gloom and the fog I saw the light box of the National Theatre proclaiming Honk by George Stiles and Anthony Drew. He said, you may be surprised to hear that I shed a little tear of joy for you both, he said, because I know how hard this has been for you, and I know what a long journey it's been, and therefore how much this must mean to you. My warmest congratulations, Steve.
Oh, how wonderful.
And again, I just thought that was so generous. You know, the Jewish people say the word mensch when somebody is a good person through and through, and Steve was a mensch to us. He really was, I think, to many people.
And you are continuing that. And I know that with you have your mentorship scheme, and people come and they stay with you and ants and write, and you help them. You also have set up this incredible Stiles and Drew Prize for songwriting, and you continue to celebrate new work and assist new work with your experiences and your mentorship and your knowledge, which is just wonderful.
That's very kind of you. Again, we were inspired by Steve. When Steve was asked by his appreciation society, the Stephen Sondheim Society, if they could have a competition in a theatre on a Sunday every year to find a best new Sondheim performer, the Stephen Sondheim Student Performer of the Year competition, which is still going very successfully, Steve said, yes, you can absolutely have a competition in my name, but only if they don't just sing my work. I want them to sing new work as well. And so the organisers of the Sondheim competition went along to Mercury Musical Developments, which is the charity that Ants and I are also involved with, that nurtures new musical theatre writing in the UK, and was actually formed out of the Sondheim lectureship year at Oxford. It was that group of writers that didn't want to disband after their amazing year with Steve, and so they formed themselves into something they called the Mercury Workshop.
Wow.
And that Mercury Workshop became the Mercury Musical Developments that it is now. So we added a song prize as well as the Student Performer Prize to the competition that happened every year for Steve to find a new musical theatre performer. And when I asked Steve why he'd insisted on there being new songs as well as his own, his answer was very simple. He said, well, why wouldn't we?
Exactly.
I mean, there must be new writing. There must be new writing. Otherwise, what's the point?
Like Tim Rice said, it will come, and it can't do it on its own. It has to be nurtured and celebrated and looked for.
Yes, you have to peer under the rocks and the carpets and see if it's hiding there.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're doing your mentoring, is there, I'm leading into my next question and trying to do a clever segue, but I don't know if it's going to work, George.
You'll do it.
Is there a secret, you think, to writing a good musical? What's George's tips for a good musical?
Story, and title. We've already touched on title, but story. If the songs are great but the story's crap, you'll never have a success.
Yeah, everything has to hang on something that the audience are going to find interesting.
Yeah, you've got to keep them on the edge of their seat. What happens next?
Yeah.
Does this character come good? Do they get their just desserts? Whatever. There are a million sorts of stories, but all the best ones have a very archetypally strong structure, whether it's a TV show, a musical, a film.
You know those stories work because they stand the test of time, stories that are going to appeal and interest. The story of the 6 wives, you know.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, that is true. But some wisdom we received early on was that if you're thinking of adapting something that's pre-existing, if it works particularly brilliantly in another medium, so if it's, for example, a great movie, it might not necessarily be a great stage play. But if it's a promising but flawed movie, it might actually be great as a stage play because you might be able to iron out the flaws that were there in the story the first time.
Yeah.
So there's that. And there's also two other things I always look for, which is one is, why does this story sing? What is it inherently about the story that means that adding music and songs to it is going to make it better? And the final thing is two questions I always ask. Why now and why this story?
Ooh, okay.
What is relevant about telling this story at this particular moment in time? And the one that most clearly answered that for me was Six, because it was absolutely on the very crest of the wave of the Me Too movement. It just felt so timely.
Absolutely.
But because it was right at the front of it, I thought this wave is going to build and build. It's not going to go away and dump on the shore in 2 seconds.
No.
And so it has mercifully proved to be.
What I love about Six is I love my Tudor history and I'm an absolute geek about it. And not only am I going to the theatre and watching a great show, being thoroughly entertained, being made to laugh, being gobsmacked by the talent on stage, but I'm also getting my history fix and I'm hearing little lyrics. You know, me and my daughter, I've decided that when you do your granny version, I'm going to give you my Welsh Anne of Cleves.
Oh, fabulous. I can't wait.
It sounds fabulous in a Welsh accent.
Give us a burst then, Caroline. Come on.
Sitting here all alone, in a throne, in a palace that I happen to own, bring me some pheasant, keep it on the bone. There you go.
I love it. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll get my costume.
Although I'm going to add as my caveat to that, I'm going to say I'm taking your number, but I'm promising nothing.
Oh, George, finally, this is my last question. If you are in a bit of a despairing state about the world or life or anything, which musical do you turn to feel better, that nourishes your soul?
My goodness. I very often find the actual physical CD of one of my favorite recordings, which is Bernstein conducting his own musical of Candide, which was another very flawed musical in terms of story, but has the most sublime score. And I just think from the opening notes of that overture through to all of those extraordinary songs, I find something that feeds me. It's probably the fact, again, that it's based on Voltaire and it's got so many amazing truths. You know, it was based on that essentially brilliant statement from Voltaire. It's all for the best in this best of all possible worlds, which is obviously the biggest load of old crap anyone's ever said. And it's meant to make you smile wryly and go, yeah, right. Of course, it's all for the best.
Yeah.
People are actually bastards and self-serving, and they'll do what they want, whether they like it or not, whether you like it or not.
But at the end of the day, you can go out into your garden and have a nice afternoon.
But exactly, you can go out and you can tend your garden and watch it grow. And there is always hope, because every spring we renew and we have another chance, don't we? And that's what I love about writing and performing musicals with companies of actors and creatives, is that every time you have a first day of rehearsal, you have the chance to be the best version of yourself when you start with that company. No one has worked with you before, probably no one's known you. This is a new project. You're making something new. Watch our garden grow.
Oh, George, you're giving me goosebumps. That's so true. The optimism and the hope and the nerves of that first day of rehearsal, when nobody knows what they're doing, nobody has learned anything, and the difference in what happens then to that group of people 6 weeks later in a theatre, fully costumed, fully orchestrated, fully lit. That's brilliant. Aren't we lucky?
We are lucky. That's what I always feel. It's like the best job in the world, isn't it? Because you have this chance to start again every time. Most people don't get that. They're stuck in one job, doing one thing, living one life. They've committed to a relationship or whatever to their kids, and they feel stuck. They feel hidebound. And we get to break out every time we start a new job.
And to reinvent and recreate. And absolutely. The last show that I saw that really gave me a massive buzz was I went up to Birmingham last year and I saw Becoming Nancy. And what I love about our relationship, George, is that you get me in and you get me in for workshops, and I love that process. For those who don't know, a workshop is when you go in and it's quite often the first time the composer and the lyricist and the director, or even not a director, have heard their work done. And it's sometimes an opportunity to try staging something it's just to listen to whether the words and the music blend and the structure of the show. And I'm quite often in at that process with you guys.
You are, bless you.
Which I was with Becoming Nancy. And then to sit in a theatre and see it fully realised on stage, when all I remember is it being in a sort of a dusty old room with a carpet and a few microphones, is absolutely fabulous, you know.
You mean we actually had a carpet? My God, they didn't skimp on the expense, did they? A carpet and microphones.
I think it might have been carpet tiles, but, you know, it was something. But, you know, and I think that's down to you guys, the fact that you see something and you go, I'm going to give that a go. I'm going to create something. I'm going to put something out there. And I think we need people like you in the world. And I just want to say thank you for your work and for what you do. Because also, if it wasn't for your work, I would not have worked as much as I have. So thank you.
Well, can I just say, please keep doing what you do, because you bring always such heart and truth to what you do.
Oh, thank you very much.
You are, like Mary Poppins says, you are brilliant at getting out of your own way. Because there's that line, isn't there, in Mary Poppins? Mary Poppins says, anything can happen if only we can get out of our own way. And I think that's a very shrewd observation. Anything can happen if you let it, is the lyrical version of it. But the spoken line, which is more P.L. Travis's, if we can get out of our own way, actually, it's a Julian Fellows line, and a very brilliant one.
You've got Mary Poppins out on tour again. You've got 6 all over the world. What else is coming up for you, George?
Well, we are trying to find a theatre for Becoming Nancy, because as you say, we then did that production last year in Birmingham in November at the Rep. And the reaction from the audience was amongst the most extraordinary things that I've ever seen in my whole professional life. Every single performance, matinees, evenings, beginnings of the weeks, ends of the weeks, the audience was A, packed, and B, they were on the edge of their seats for that story, which is a coming-of-age gay story in 1979 in East Dulwich in London. And these incredibly diverse audiences in Birmingham were absolutely with that story. And every night, every performance, they stood, they cheered, they clapped, they sang along, and they wouldn't let the cast go at the end. They just kept on going. And it happened at every performance. And I just think it's quite rare that a story speaks across time like that. You know, we talked about Six Wives of Henry VIII speaking across hundreds of years. This is the story just speaking across a few decades, but it's, again, speaking completely outside the audience's own lived experience. But it seems to have something to say that touches everybody. And again, it sends you out on a complete high.
I mean, it's funny and it has such heart and such impetus and energy on that stage, but it's also one of the most romantic musicals I think I've ever seen. I was so invested in their relationship. I came away just absolutely on such a high. I really hope you find somewhere in London for it, or anywhere for it. It needs to be seen.
Well, thank you. Well, amen to that. And from your mouth to whoever's ears upstairs. Thank you.
Oh, George, thank you so much for coming and talking musicals to me today. It's been an absolute privilege and a pleasure.
I've had the best morning. Thank you, Caroline. I've loved it.
Thanks, darling man.
Can we do it again sometime?
Well, I was thinking, I don't know if my producer's listening to this. Well, I know he is, so that's a lie. What I might do is I might then get one of my next series might be, you know, I'll get 10 more questions and ask the same people 10 different questions about musicals, but let's see.
And see if they can not repeat themselves.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks ever so much, George. Thank you so much for listening today. This has been Talk Musicals to Me for the Bloop Network. My fabulous producer is Aaron Ware, and the music you heard is from the pen of the sublime Tom Self. If you get a moment, please subscribe or follow and rate the podcast by clicking the stars below on the podcast page. It takes about 2 seconds to do, and it will really help the podcast and its future life and would make us massively, eternally, enormously grateful. In the meantime, another huge thanks for tuning in, and please do so again next time to see who will be next up to talk musicals to me.